1. I was working as a machinist in a small machine shop at a big manufacturing company. We were a small team that worked on highly customized projects away from the main production line, and had a good selection of older manual machines and a couple of modern CNC machines. Due to the nature of the work and the rate it came in, we set our own priorities as needed, and would frequently have quiet spells where we could work on homework projects. Most of the team were apprentices on secondment from the main production area, with only me and one other fully time served and skilled machinist on the department's payroll through an outside agency. The apprentices were paid by the main company. As our department didn't really generate its own income, the apprentices were a much preferred source of labor. Their only cost to the department was in material loss and tool breakage, which were common occurrences. It was either from lack of experience in the 3 newer apprentices, or by the sole final year apprentice Liam, who thought that because he was nearing the end of his training that he knew it all, much as me and my skilled colleague tried to advise otherwise. As a result of the minimal department income and the regular apprentice mistakes, good lathe tooling was few and far between. My colleague, who'd been at the company most of his working life, kept all the tools needed to use locked away for only his use and mine if I needed to borrow something obscure, as he would trust me to take care of them. As I'd only been there a couple of years but had my own lathe at home, I bought a lot of my own tooling in, or bought it myself rather than go through the battle of purchasing department, and as such being for everyone to use. After about 2.5 years, a new head of department was employed, who took on several departments including ours. Within 6 months of him starting, a new manager was assigned to our department. The old guy was great and ran the department to the best of his ability, but the HOD didn't like that we appeared to be a money pit, so off he went. My colleague had a feeling about things as soon as HOD took over, and somehow knew that we wouldn't be too far down the list. I was more optimistic, as we could be depended on to get things done in a clinch, and we had experience the apprentices didn't. And our contracts were pretty solid in that they'd have to find a really good and legitimate reason to get rid of us. My colleague didn't like all the changes, was already well past retirement age, and decided to call it a day. As the company had gone through several ownerships over his time with them and his tools weren't documented, he gave a few to me and took the rest with him. With him gone, I thought there'd be little chance of them getting rid of me, as there'd be no one to supervise the younger apprentices, or to do the work that was beyond their abilities. Liam had officially finished his apprenticeship in the summer and was now, at least by title, a fully fledged machinist. Anyone who's worked in the job should know that this doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. There's always much more to learn and more experience to gain. But he was so full of himself that he felt he no longer needed any advice from me, and much to my amusement the mistakes kept happening. If anything, they were more frequent by him trying and failing to prove a point. It was quite obvious he didn't really appreciate my input, so I stopped offering guidance and just let him get on with it, giving him the rope to hang himself, so to speak. Unfortunately, Liam was quite friendly with the new boss, and that would ultimately be my demise. The new boss was also health and safety mad, which I don't have a problem with in the slightest. I know and fully appreciate the importance when implemented reasonably, and that gave Liam an opportunity to do away with the only other person above him, me. In my collection of tools, I had 2 shopmate mallets, which the previous boss had absolutely no issue with, but they mysteriously made their way out of my locked toolbox onto my new boss's desk. The boss wasn't hands-on and wouldn't want to get his suit dirty coming onto the shop floor, so it was fairly obvious that the ex-apprentice was the one to break into my toolbox. And there was nothing unsafe about the mallets. The brass faces were shrunk fit into a solid steel head with a welded steel handle attached. You could beat on them for days and not separate the brass faces. But they weren't proper equipment. In other words, bought from a tool supplier, so I was sacked pretty much on the spot. I had to gather all my belongings and leave. But I knew this would cause issues as the CNC programs were all written for my tools, and angry as I was that Liam had broken into my toolbox and ratted me out, I still didn't want everything to go to shit without me. My boss was aware most of the CNC programs were backed up to my personal USB storage, and asked me to transfer everything before leaving. I complied with the request, transferred all the programs even though I wasn't legally contracted to do so, but I knew he'd need more than that. Throwing him a bone, I advised that the programs were written for my tooling. In his eyes, that immediately meant that I should leave everything required for use, which I begrudgingly agreed to for a token payment towards their value. He scoffed, told me to take my tools and get off the site. It took a lot longer than I expected for them to realize that their very expensive CNC lathe was now next to useless without spending over £3,000 on new tooling. My £800 offer was now incredibly appealing after 3 weeks of it sitting idle. But of course, my boss was still trying to make the books look better, and phoned me up offering £400. I reciprocated the scoff he gave me 3 weeks prior, and hung up. 2. At the time this happened, I worked in the storeroom unloading trucks and bringing stock to the floor to be stocked by the overnight crew. Our shift at the time was 3:30 p.m. to 12 a.m. Our store manager made it clear that no overtime was permitted to be worked, anything over 9 hours by company policy. This meant, at the latest, we had to leave by 12:30 a.m. We usually cut it close because we were chronically understaffed for various reasons. I knew this night was going to be bad the moment I arrived. We had 6 workers scheduled, yet 2 called in sick, including the shift lead. This meant that I was put in charge as I had the most experience, and the day shift managers all loved me because I worked my butt off. I then checked our delivery schedule, and it showed 2 semi-trucks, both with over 2,000 items each that needed to be unloaded, in addition to another truck that was expected to have 20-plus pallets of stock. This meant we had over 4,000 items that needed to be unloaded by hand, with only 4 workers to do it. In addition, we were also responsible for scanning items out of overstock bins and bringing them to the floor if the system detected an item needed to be restocked. Needless to say, the shift sucked. We didn't get our first break until almost 10 p.m., and around 7 p.m. the system dropped about 350 items that needed to be scanned out of the overstock bins. There were almost 200 bins we would need to search for this stuff. As the shift lead, the fact we were so behind was my fault. Definitely didn't have anything to do with being overworked with unachievable time targets. So the overnight managers arrived at 10:30 p.m., and one of them went ballistic and yelled at me, "Cool, whatever, I don't care. I'll just leave at 12 a.m. So here's where the compliance comes in, to a point. 12 a.m. comes around, and the manager refuses to let us leave. Doors get locked with keys only managers have, and alarms are set. One of the 4 of us is a college student and has an exam at 8 a.m., so they let him go. 12:30 a.m. rolls around and we start to leave. Again, not allowed to leave by my manager. Keep in mind, overtime is not allowed, and after 12:30 we were in overtime. One of the 3 remaining of my crew has childcare issues, so they let him leave. At 1 a.m. the overnight crew goes on break and the doors are unlocked so the manager can smoke. My only remaining crew member just walks out, and manager lets him go without argument. I was working, so didn't know until after the doors were relocked. 3 a.m. rolls around and night crew goes for lunch. I'm fed up with manager's attitude as he's been harassing me for the last 2 hours about not being done, without offering any help. I decide that I'm going home. As I walk out the doors, manager is standing there.
"Where are you going? Are you done?"
Nope. Still about 20 pallets to go out and about 80 overstock items to be picked from the bins.
"Go back and finish. You can't leave."
I'm already 2.5 hours into overtime. I'm going home.
"Do we need to go into the office and talk about your poor attitude and lack of work ethic?"
Screw you, manager. I'm going home.
"Don't come back. You're fired."
Have fun explaining to the store manager why you fired me. I'll be sure to tell him about the shift tonight. I then left and went home. About 5-ish hours later, 8 a.m., I get a call from the store. It's the store manager and he wants to talk to me. Can I come in for a meeting at noon? I say sure, I'll be there. I get to the store just before noon and get escorted into the manager's office by one of the day managers. "So I hear you had some overtime last night. Care to explain why?" I explain everything that happened above. "So you left at 3 a.m., yes?" And manager said you were fired, correct? Yes. He isn't allowed to do that. What you told me matches what the other night manager said happened. As a result, the manager is being moved to day shift for retraining. You're also not fired. We need a new overstock room lead, and I'd like to offer it to you. It comes with a $1 an hour night shift bonus and a $1 an hour raise. I'll take it. I had been trying for this position anyway. When do I start? You start tomorrow night if you want. Great, thank you, store manager. I then went home and told my family, who were quite happy with the turnout, especially my mom, who also worked at the store and was rather pissed about what happened. 3. When this all started, I was trying to get out of paying for something I didn't need and never asked for. By the end, I was going for blood as someone else enacted their revenge. This happened back in 2002 on Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. I was stationed down the way at 32nd Street Naval Base for my military occupation specialty school, and was a new Lance Corporal E3 at the time. I had a 1994 Dodge Spirit with 180,000 miles or so, and I'd just driven it across the country. I bought it a few days before leaving Kansas at an auto location. A couple of weeks into my school, it died at the gate next to a sentry. After an initial freakout that I was a suicide bomber and the subsequent search of me and my car, everyone calms down and they help me push the car to the top of the hill, so I can coast down the other side and into the auto repair shop parking lot, which thankfully went without incident. Before I go in, I call my dad and then his cousin. My dad knows a ton about cars, and his cousin is a mechanic with his own very successful shop, like a dozen work bays, and they handle everything from regular cars to farm equipment to semis. I know a fair bit about cars of my own, but he knows everything. Between us, we decide it looks like the distributor or the distributor cap is the issue. My dad's cousin says it's a common issue on spirits from this time, and recommends I get it fixed here by a real mechanic. Now at this point, it's important to note, this shop did a very thorough once-over for me after I bought the car, and gave me good notes on the condition of the car in writing from his shop. I go in and talk to the guy at the counter. They're not too busy, and pull it into a bay and run their diagnostics. Same thing. Distributor cap. Cool. I get the services agreement saying they'll replace it, and call me if they find anything else. I hear nothing until the end of the week when they call and say my car is ready. When I get there, they present me with a bill for like $1,400. Wow, just wow. Now my heart has stopped beating and I say something about that being a lot for a distributor cap. The guy who owns the place, I found out he's a veteran from way back, breaks off talking to a master sergeant and comes over to talk to me. He starts telling me about how it was much worse than they originally thought, and they ended up having to replace my radiator plus hoses, and my timing belt and a head gasket. I'm still in shock and say something like the head gasket was fine 2 weeks ago, and so was the radiator and the timing. He puts his hand on my shoulder and tells me I don't know what I'm talking about, because they've been waiting to fail for a long time now. I'm confused now and say that's not possible. I bought it 2 weeks ago. And he cuts me off, and says I was sold a complete lemon, and I should have had it checked. He says he felt bad for me, and this should have cost over $2,000, but he cut me a deal, and he can work with me in an installment plan, but will have to charge me interest. Now I'm suspicious and starting to get pissed, and I say the only repair I authorized was a distributor cap, and they should have called me before doing anything else. And I start to explain I've got paperwork from the inspection I had done that said those other things were fine. I'm going to get it from the car, and the master sergeant grabs me by the arm and starts telling me I'm being ungrateful and disrespectful to a respected mechanic and business owner, and asks me if I'm implying he's cheating me. Every time I try to open my mouth, he cuts me off and keeps telling the owner not to worry, he'll make sure this young pup pays what is owed. He's threatening to take me over to admin and have my pay docked. Now I'm angry and a bit scared. Another Marine intervenes and says that's a little extreme and to let me say my piece. I get permission to get into my car to get my maintenance history, which includes an oil change, the inspection documentation, and the original quote for the distributor cap work. At this point, there's a crowd of customers and some other passers-by. The owner of the garage and the Master Sergeant are in full theater mode, talking about how I'm not appreciating the huge help they've been, and I'm trying to get out of paying for work I asked for. Now I'm mostly just pissed. I come in, and the Master Sergeant cuts me off and tells me to be careful how I talk to his friend. I ask the Master Sergeant if he's going to let me speak, or keep interrupting me while I'm in a private conversation with a business owner. I ask him if he owns part of the shop, no, and ask why he's so interested in not hearing a Marine out. Then I get out the original statement of services and say the distributor cap is all I agreed to. I also ask why he didn't call me, and he says he called my barrack several times and left messages, including ones telling me the car was undrivable until the repairs were made, so he went with the lowest cost option to get me back on the road. Oops, I say, that's interesting. The only number I gave you is my cell phone, and I don't have any messages or even attempted calls until the previous evening when they left a message that my car was ready. I show everyone my call history, including a captain who was very interested and standing quietly by. The Master Sergeant has backed off, and the captain is quietly talking to him off on the side. Now the owner is backpedaling a bit and saying he was thinking of a different customer, but he's already made the replacement and has to charge me for the work. Then I pull out the stuff from the inspection, and it has some fun little statements in it. Statements like, timing belt good, timing good. Check in again at 30,000 miles. Radiator appears to be recently replaced. All hoses new in last 6 months. Nothing on the head gasket, but there's a statement that there are no leaks in that area, which was why he said he had to replace it. I say he can put all of my original stuff back on because all I'm paying for is a distributor cap work. He gets red-faced and starts demanding I pay for labor, and he can't put things back because they were too badly damaged in the removal process. Now some old retired guy chimes in from the back and asks, "What kind of mechanic damages things when they take them apart?" The owner drags out my radiator and there is a giant hole in one side that looks like it was stabbed with a crowbar. Now a couple of other people, locals, are questioning past situations where he helped them out with repairs that they didn't know they needed. The Master Sergeant tried to walk off, and a colonel and a sergeant major in civilian attire post him to the side for a later conversation. The captain pulls me aside and asks to see the info I have and to see my phone again, and steps behind the counter to photocopy it all. He has a truly evil grin. Turns out he's a prior enlisted former infantry marine who became an officer after going back to college. He had suspected this shop of being crooked for a while, but never had enough proof. He's on the commanding general's staff, and they were looking into complaints from permanent personnel and retirees in the area. The owner is sweating bullets now. I only pay for the distributor cap and get a statement that says my balance is 0, so he doesn't try anything in the future. The captain takes me to dinner and gets my info and basically a statement from me of what happened. After dinner he takes me back to his office, while he types up something for me to sign about the whole incident, and I call Verizon to get them to fax over the incoming and outgoing calls from my number for the past week. He explains that the Master Sergeant has been steering a lot of customers to his buddy, and they suspect he's been getting kickbacks. The captain and several others have been taking their cars there for months to try and catch the guy doing what he did to me. The Master Sergeant sealed his fate when he started threatening to take my pay. They suspected he was getting kickbacks or favors in exchange for hooking up his buddy. Now he has the justification he needs to formally look into the Master Sergeant. The captain was thrilled and bought me a 6-pack for using up so much of my Friday evening. I wasn't around long enough to see the outcome, but when I left there were auditors from the base's services going through the business with a fine-tooth comb, and it was a legal matter. Once something like that gets started, it probably means the business and the owners will get kicked out of the on-base location. The base owns the building and the owner leases it. He and his business would also end up blacklisted as a place known for taking advantage of service members. Most commands give this out to people who check in, so no one patronizes them. It still boggles my mind that one veteran would try to use that status to take advantage of others. Or that a senior Marine would do that to other Marines. I know there are people out there like that, but having the shared common background we do, I expect better. 4. Over a decade ago, my life changed forever. I met my now wife, and being with her made me look at my life a lot differently. I worked in a career that I no longer liked, for a company I no longer believed in. As soon as I could, I found another job and quit. It was refreshing to be free of a job that was holding me back. Unfortunately, this freedom was short-lived. My new job was for a guy whose employees called him Meathead. He was a general contractor who did everything from home repairs, highway line painting, firewood, and snow removal. At first, I was eager to do whatever I could. I was young, the pay was great, and I enjoy working outdoors. Eventually, I proved to be too eager, and Meathead soon realized how I wouldn't say no to anything. This was also around the time I got engaged, so I obviously needed extra money to pay for my wedding. 60-hour weeks were soon the norm. I'd paint parking lots all night, sleep a couple hours, and be out roofing by 7 a.m. But hey, I was young and full of get up and go. I was about to get married, nothing could stop me. With that setup, here's where the malicious compliance comes into play. Meathead was one of those contractors who would buy foreclosed properties, flip them, and resell. Meathead also would go to construction supply stores looking for good deals. End-of-the-roll carpets, the twisted lumber at the bottom of a load, stuff like that. It wasn't an ideal situation for us builders, but Meathead only did this on his personal projects, so whatever. As I said, he paid well and everything was done to code. For one particular project, Meathead wanted an interlock patio outside the kitchen, about 16 feet by 30 feet with a path leading to the driveway. Obviously, with me being the eager beaver, I was tasked with the job. Now, for those who don't know, interlock is an enormous pain in the ass, requiring a decent amount of setup and planning. One of the key things is knowing what the interlock pattern is. There are simple designs that all use the same brick, pretty straightforward, right? Boy, was I in for a surprise. The stones are delivered, and just my luck, Meathead has gotten a deal on a bunch of leftover pavers. There were 4 different sizes and the quantities were all over the place. Me, wanting to do a good job, spent 2 exhausting days counting and sorting out the stones. I piled them into bundles of stones, evenly distributing all the sizes. As I laid them, I planned to use one pile, then use the next, never running out of one particular size, making the patio look uniform. Notice how I said planned? I arrive on day 3, just in time to see Meathead finishing pushing all the stones into one big pile with the backhoe, to make room for a load of topsoil that he got another deal on. When I tried to explain how he had disturbed my careful planning, he actually laughed at me, saying,
"You're putting too much effort into this, just do it. I don't care how."
So I, with the gears of pettiness starting to turn, simply said, "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." On to the maliciousness. Now, the stones I was using were 2x4, 4x4, 4x6, and 6x8. Thankfully, the dimensions were all consistent, so a pattern was eventually easy to create, once I found out how many stones were in each group. But now, with my plans so inconveniently changed, I had to adapt. I had calculated around 300 groups of each stone, and I had to pick out the pavers for each group when I needed them, so my calculations weren't completely wasted. What I actually did change was the pattern. I simply randomized the pattern, with one slight change. Every group had a specific arrangement of stones. It blended in very well with the pattern, to the point that even I could have overlooked it. But in the end, there were over 300 stone cock and balls, forever enshrined onto that patio. I never told anybody about this, and as far as I know, it was never noticed. I really wish there was some sort of fallout, but I'll never know. Eventually, I found employment elsewhere, as Meathead is one of those employers that you tire of, even if the pay is good. Lesson learned, life goes on. And absolute icing on the cake, remember how I said that Meathead got deals for his personal projects? 14 years later, he still lives at the Dick House. 5. The hero in this story is a gentleman I worked with called Roger. Roger retired from his career job a few years ago and works part-time in my team to keep himself busy. We work as part of a small team providing a vital but niche service and are part of a larger department. We used to work in a large open-plan office with the whole department, but when recent events happened, we were moved to a small office room a short distance away to continue our shift work with less exposure to other employees. Unfortunately, our new room is quite small and lacks a coat rack, so we put our coats on the back of our chairs. One day we come into work to a reminder email from management that we couldn't put our coats on chairs and had to put them on the coat rack in the open-plan office. They cited a health and safety issue where a chair once fell over in another department due to having a heavy jacket on it. I grumbled since I had to take my wallet etc. out of my jacket pockets, as I didn't know who'd be in the other room where my jacket had to go, and it wouldn't be secured. None of us were happy that our coats, scarves, etc. would be in a completely separate room. I was complaining about it to Roger, and since he's just here for the fun of it, he decided to do something about it. He read the safety details in the employee manual, and the document stated, "Jackets must be hung up and not placed on chairs." So for a week, Roger hung his jacket wherever he liked. On the door, on the edge of his desk, off the window ledge, even off the printer, but crucially never off his chair. After a few days, we had an email advising that the safety document was amended to "Jackets must be hung on coat racks or coat hooks." I thanked Roger for helping, but figured that was that. I was wrong. Roger came in to work with a screwdriver and a brand new coat hook. He screwed it onto the back of the door and hung up his jacket. The next week we came in to a removed coat hook and the additional rule in the safety document advising, "Only procurement-approved fixtures and fittings can be used in offices." Well, it was nice while it lasted, I thought, but not our Roger. During the pandemic, we had much less paperwork and much more time to fill, so he devised a final twist. Roger sweet-talked our cleaner for access to the cleaning supplies cupboard. Under her watchful eye, he unscrewed one of the many hooks used for hanging cleaning bibs on. He then screwed it into the back of our office door, with the procurement-approved sticker on it clearly visible. Our manager eventually saw it, sighed, and just said, "Fine." We hung our coats happily on Roger's hook, and I congratulated him for being not once, not twice, but 3 times compliant. I also bought him a treat from the vending machine to say thanks. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 57. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Ooh, I played a little bit of the new Walking Dead, the Walking Dead Onslaught VR game that I got for my birthday the other day. Not too much into it, so far not bad. It's a bit more restrictive than I'd like. I'd like it if you could actually drive cars in it, like they actually do drive cars in the TV show. Because this game's based on the TV show, not the comic. But, yeah, not too bad so far, and we'll see. They might update it, because it was originally meant to have a co-op option in it, which they took out. And who knows, because these days they can update games on the fly. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.